Have you ever wondered what would happen if Greece had fallen to communism after World War II? How different would the map of Europe look today? And more importantly, what saved this small, war-ravaged nation from slipping into the Soviet sphere? Well, Greece's fate was hanging by a thread after the war. Think about this. It's 1946 and Greece is in ruins. The economy is shattered, the political landscape is chaotic, and the nation is deeply divided. Communism isn't just a distant threat here, but it's knocking on Greece's door, ready to take hold of a country already on its knees. But what would happen next would shock everyone. Greece would become the first major battleground in a global struggle between East and West, setting the stage for the Cold War. And as you'll find out later on, the Greek Civil War of 1946 to 1949 would become a decisive moment that would alter the course of history forever. So, how did Greece manage to hold the line against communism? What key events determined its future? And most importantly, who stepped in when Greece needed help the most? We're going to explore these questions in this video as we dive into the struggle for Greece's destiny. So stay with me and follow closely until the end. Okay, so let's get this straight. Greece had just emerged from World War II, only to be plunged into an even more brutal conflict, the Greek Civil War. But what I'm going to reveal next is perhaps the most interesting part. This wasn't just a war fought with guns and bullets. It was a battle of ideologies with communism on one side and democracy on the other. To draw a much clearer picture, the causes of this war were deeply rooted in ideological rifts. On one side, you had the Democratic Army of Greece, or DSE, communist-led force supported by the Soviet Union and neighboring communist states. On the other side, there was the government forces backed by the West, particularly Britain and later the United States. But here's the thing. The seeds of this conflict were sown during World War II. Greece's resistance movements, notably the Greek People's Liberation Army, or ELAS, played a crucial role against the Nazis. However, ELAS's communist influence set the stage for civil war. The Varkiza Agreement of February 1945, meant to bring peace and disarm the resistance, failed, leading to renewed hostilities and full-scale civil war. Now, let's see what happens next. As the war unfolded, Greece became a battlefield for key events. The Battle of Athens in December 1944 was a precursor, where the communist and government forces clashed. This battle didn't end the conflict, it escalated it. The DSE shifted to guerrilla warfare in northern Greece, making the war even more protracted and bloody. But what happened next would shock everyone. The critical Battle of Mount Gramos in 1949 marked the decline of the communist forces. The government forces, now heavily supported by American military aid, turned the tide. The defeat of Gramos was a death blow to the DSE, effectively ending the war, though the scars on Greece were deep. But that's not the only disturbing part. The human cost was astounding. Hundreds of thousands of Greeks were displaced, villages destroyed, and lives shattered. The Paidomazoma, or child gathering, where thousands of children were taken by communist forces to be raised in Eastern Bloc countries, tore apart families and communities. On top of this, atrocities were committed by both sides. Civilians were executed, and internment camps were set up where prisoners endured suffering. These events underscore the brutality of the Greek Civil War and the lengths both sides went to achieve their goals. Now, let me make this clear. The Greek Civil War was one of the darkest chapters in the nation's history. It was also a pivotal moment that determined Greece's future. The conflict may have ended in 1949, but its impact would be felt for generations. As you'll find out in the next section, the outcome of this war set the stage for Greece's place in the Cold War and the world. You might be wondering, how did Greece manage to turn the tide in the Civil War, especially when it seemed like the communists had the upper hand? Well, the Truman Doctrine laid the groundwork.
As in the case of Greece, if Turkey is to have the assistance it needs, the United States must supply it.
This bold policy marked a significant shift in U.S. foreign strategy, and Greece was its first major test case. Let me explain. In 1947, Greece was on the brink of falling into the Soviet sphere. With high stakes, President Harry S. Truman faced a pivotal decision. Should the United States step in to prevent Greece and Turkey from becoming communist? Recognizing the broader Cold War implications, Truman decided to act. And so here's where things get interesting. Truman committed $400 million in aid to Greece and Turkey, which is equivalent to $4.4 billion today. This was not just financial support, but a strategic move to ensure these nations remained bulwarks against communism. The aid package set the stage for U.S. involvement in the region for decades. But wait, how was the money allocated for maximum impact? A significant portion went to military aid, artillery, aircraft, and critical hardware, giving Greek forces a technological edge. Substantial funds were also dedicated to economic assistance and infrastructure rebuilding, aiming to stabilize Greece long-term. And in case you're not aware, the U.S. also sent experts. The American Mission for Aid to Greece, or AMAG, was established, with advisors working to rebuild Greece's economy. Roads, ports, and agriculture were prioritized to boost recovery and reduce communism's appeal. Now, let's talk about the military side. Military aid alone wasn't enough without the right leadership. General James Van Fleet, experienced in counterinsurgency, was tasked with reorganizing the Greek army. His approach included psychological operations, PSYOP, to demoralize the communist forces through leaflets, broadcast, and propaganda. These tactics proved so effective, they are still studied as successful counterinsurgency strategies. But looking at the bigger picture, the Truman Doctrine wasn't just about saving Greece, it was about containing communism globally. It marked the beginning of the U.S. policy of containment, which would define the Cold War for decades. But leave alone the U.S. How did Britain and its international allies shape the fate of Greece in the midst of a global power struggle? Now let's rewind a bit, because as it turns out, before the U.S. stepped in with the Truman Doctrine, Britain had already been playing a crucial role in Greece. So Britain's involvement was a bit complicated. They supported the Greek government during the early Civil War, but faced significant economic difficulties that affected their commitment. To draw a much clearer picture, Britain had been heavily involved in Greece since World War II's end. British forces provided military aid and training to bolster Greece's defenses against the communist threat. However, Britain's own economic crisis made sustaining this support increasingly difficult. But here's where it gets even more interesting. In 1947, Britain, financially strained, informed the U.S. they could no longer support Greece. This withdrawal was crucial because without Britain's backing, Greece was vulnerable to communism. This led to the U.S. stepping in with the Truman Doctrine. Okay, so let me get this straight. Britain's withdrawal wasn't the end of international support. It marked the beginning of a broader Western alliance. France and Italy also contributed, though their support was more symbolic. France provided military equipment, and Italy offered military advisors. They understood Greece's fate was tied to the broader East-West struggle. Meanwhile, the United Nations got involved through the United Nations Special Committee on the Balkans, or UNSCOP. The committee monitored border violations and supported Greece's territorial integrity, crucial because Greece's northern neighbors, Yugoslavia, Albania, and Bulgaria, were communist states supporting the DSE. The UN's involvement helped internationalize the conflict and pressure these neighbors to limit their support. But what I'm going to reveal next is perhaps the most fascinating part. Greece wasn't just fighting a civil war. It was a proxy battleground for the Soviet Union and Western powers. Stalin largely adhered to his agreement with Churchill to respect Greece as part of the Western sphere. This showed how Cold War geopolitics often defied simple explanations. And if you think that's interesting, wait until you hear about the Tito-Stalin split in 1948. This split was a major turning point. Yugoslavia, under Tito, had support of the DSE with safe havens and supplies. But after Tito broke with Stalin, Yugoslav support dwindled, isolating the DSE and severely impacting their fight against the Greek government forces. Which begs the question, how did Greece rise from the ashes of war to rebuild its shattered economy and secure lasting stability? Now, after years of brutal conflict, Greece's economy was in tatters, infrastructure destroyed, and the social fabric torn apart. You might be wondering, how could a nation so devastated ever hope to rebuild itself, let alone stand strong against the threat of communism? Well, as it turns out, a massive infusion of aid from the United States, better known as the Marshall Plan, would be injected. You see, the Marshall Plan, officially known as the European Recovery Program, was launched in 1948 to restore Europe after World War II. Greece, having endured both the war and a brutal civil conflict, was one of the countries most in need of assistance. The country received about $376 million in aid, equivalent to $4.1 billion today. But what's even more fascinating is how this aid was used to jumpstart specific projects that had a lasting impact on Greece's economic recovery. Let me explain. One of the most important projects funded by the Marshall Plan was the reconstruction of the Corinth Canal, a vital maritime route that had been heavily damaged during the war. This wasn't just about restoring a waterway. It meant reestablishing Greece's position in global trade, which was essential for its economic revival. But that's not all. The expansion of the Piraeus port was another Marshall Plan project that played a significant role in revitalizing Greece's economy. These projects helped lay the groundwork for long-term economic stability of Greece. As if that's not enough, the Marshall Plan also forced an agricultural and industrial development. The thing is, Greece's economy had always been heavily reliant on agriculture, but the war had decimated the country's farmlands. So the U.S. aid was going to help modernize Greece's agricultural sector to ensure food security and improve productivity. The truth is, this focus on agricultural development was crucial in stabilizing the economy and in turn diminishing the appeal of communism. Now, let me make this clear. The economic stabilization that followed was pivotal in creating thousands of jobs, improving living standards, and giving the people of Greece a reason to believe in a future that didn't involve communism. As economic conditions improved, the grip of communist ideology began to loosen, especially in rural areas where poverty had previously provided fertile ground for radical ideas. What's more, the government was able to empower rural communities by promoting smallholder farming, giving them a stake in the country's future and reducing their susceptibility to communist influence. And as you'll find out in the next chapter, this integration was key to maintaining political stability in the years to come. Okay, so let me get this straight. Greece's journey from the devastation of war to a stable, prosperous nation was nothing short of miraculous. I think we can all agree that it was a combination of military, economic, and political factors that prevented Greece from falling under communist control. The Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, and the decisive actions of Western allies all played a critical role in shaping Greece's future. But what's more, these events didn't just save Greece, they cemented its position in the Western Alliance. And this eventually led to Greece's membership in NATO in 1952, further solidifying its role as a key player in the Cold War. In other words, Greece's experience offers a powerful lesson in the importance of foreign aid and intervention in the global struggle against communism. Now, let's put things into perspective. Greece's triumph over communism wasn't just a victory for the West. It's a solid case about how strategic support, both military and economic, can turn the tide in a seemingly unwinnable conflict. And the lessons from Greece's experience are still relevant today, especially as we face new geopolitical challenges around the world. So, as we look back on Greece's journey from tears to triumph, we can see how this small nation's struggle was part of a much larger narrative, a narrative that defined the course of the Cold War and continues to shape our world forever. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so share them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.